Hello, our first Bible reading is from Matthew 6, starting at verse 6. That's the first one. Beware of practicing your righteousness before others in order to be seen by them, for then you have no reward from your Father in heaven. So whenever you give alms, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be praised by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your alms may be done in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And whenever you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, so that they may be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But whenever you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And our second verse is from 2 Corinthians 4, starting at verse 5. For we do not proclaim ourselves, we proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your slaves for Jesus' sake. For it is the God who said, "Light will shine out of darkness," who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ. But we have this treasure in clay jars, so that it may be made clear that this extraordinary power belongs to God and does not come from us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying around in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be made visible in our bodies. For we who are living are always being handed over to the death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may also be made visible in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you. But just as we have the same spirit of faith that is in accordance with Scripture, I believed, and so I spoke. We also believe, and therefore we also speak, because we know that the one who raised Jesus will also raise us with Jesus, and will present us with you in his presence. Indeed, everything is for your sake, so that grace, when it has extended to more and more people, may increase thanksgiving to the glory of God. So we do not lose heart, even though our outer nature is wasting away. Our inner nature is being renewed day by day. For our slight, momentary affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all measure. Because we look not at what can be seen, but at what cannot be seen. For what we can be seen is temporary, but what cannot be seen is eternal.
Well, the last couple of weeks we've been in a vision series here at church for this new season, this new phase of the life of St. Oswald's called Make Room, being church in a liminal season. And I've been trying to make the argument that God does some of his best work when we are in the in-between spaces of our lives. The transitions, the changes, the places where we feel out of our depth, destabilized and uncomfortable. And 8 months ago, we started exploring seriously the idea of making St. Oswald's a standalone church apart from Christchurch Inner West, which we'd been part of for the 6 years up until from when we'd been planted. And throughout that period, we've been praying and seeking God. We've had this conviction that God is doing something. It's great, and it might also be hard. But a crucial thing when you're in that place is to make room, to not get lost in the challenges and changes that we miss what God is doing and what he will do. In the first week of the series, we kind of framed up with an introduction to this concept of liminal space and the challenges and opportunities that these seasons provide for us, with an invitation at the end to Make Room, which we then have been exploring last week and over the next 2 weeks. Last week we looked at what it might look like for us to make room for God, to look at those areas of our life that are unfruitful, the unplowed fallow ground that we might break up for the Lord, to see Him do a new work in those places if we will consecrate them to Him. And this week, I sort of wish that I had a really straightforward title, because I feel like when I can get a straightforward title or through line or point to the talk, then everything just kind of falls into place a lot more easily. But I don't have that for you today. I've been wrestling with this. This series is demanding quite a bit from me, and I've been wrestling with it. And even yesterday was umming and ahhing about what to call today's talk. In the word cloud of ideas that reach for what I want to speak about today are words like authentic, vulnerable, honest, and raw. But in the end, I've gone with make room for hiddenness. Make room for hiddenness. It's not perfect, but I think it gets at the opportunity that we have in liminal seasons to attend to the work that God is doing in our own souls. Change and transition opens us up to God's presence and power, but it can also open us up to ourselves, to being real with ourselves, honest about what's hard, about where we're struggling, about our emotions, about our hopes and dreams and fears. Liminal spaces feel unstable. And when you feel unstable, the instinct is to find stability outside yourself. That's pretty normal, the way of things for all of life. John Ortberg writes about it. He says this: anytime you see life flourishing, it is because it is receiving nourishment from outside itself. Anytime you see life flourishing, it is because it's receiving nourishment from outside itself. And so today I want to ask, what's helping you be nourished? What is fueling you and grounding you so that you don't lose yourself but have a stable self, a self that can flourish, an identity that is secure? I think we have kind of two broad options here, which will be sort of unpacking this morning. We can find it in the affirmation and approval of others, or we can find it in the affirmation and approval of our Father in heaven. And so to explore this, we're going to jump around a little bit, both those readings that we had, but we're going to start in Matthew 6. And the first part of our conversation is called proclaiming ourselves. Actually, I rewrote it as trumpeting ourselves, but it doesn't really matter. Same kind of thing. We live in a very public world these days, don't we? Everything that we do is public, in public space. I remember growing up in the late 1900s that there was a time when you could be disconnected from people. And if you were wanting to hang out with your friends, like I often did after school one day, if you did not know where they were going to be, you had Buckley's chance of finding them. But that is not the case anymore, because you've got Find My Friends or Instagram stories or Discord or whatever it is. Everything is in the public space. We live our lives before an audience all the time, and this has a profound impact on how we experience identity. Just to give you a little context here, in the 1980s, an American sociologist, very famous, Robert Bellah, wrote a book in which he talked about our modern culture in the West being defined by what he called expressive individualism. And expressive individualism was this idea that identity is formed by self-expression as we discover our deepest desires and we live them out as an expression of our authentic, true selves. You've got to do you. And the true you can't be found from anything outside you. It's got to be discovered as you dig down into your desires and figure out, what do I want in this world? Who am I? But our culture has arguably moved beyond this to what some writers are now calling performative individualism. And performative individualism is where everything is public. Most of our life is defined by our public presence. We need fuel to maintain it. We worry about how many likes we get. We feel pressure to display perfection and success as a means of securing our approval. Maybe at work you find yourself thinking, I wonder what my manager or my boss thinks about what I'm doing right now. And you'll know if that's something for you because you start doing things that you've not even been asked to do just so that you can show that you are being productive. And in a way which stands in tension with the expressive individualist tendencies in our culture, we have this deep desire to be ourselves, but we also fear being judged if we don't dress the right way, say the right things, support the right causes, and accumulate the right experiences. We want to be ourselves, but we also want to be loved, and those two things aren't always possible. And what's important about this is that a culture of performing and projecting can get inside the church too. Performative individualism becomes performative spirituality. And that can make the church suck at being honest and vulnerable. The church can feel like a place that is soaked in competition and comparison, from Bible knowledge to career progression to ticking off and checking off the right life stage goals. And so rather than being honest when someone asks you how you're going, you feel pressure to respond with great or good or at worst, oh, you know. But we don't know because we are hiding our real selves to protect and perform. And Jesus spoke often about performative spirituality in his critique of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. And he instructed his followers not to be like them because they do everything for show. In Matthew 6, part of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says to those who would follow in his way, chapter 6, verse 1, if you've got your Bible open, beware of practicing your righteousness before others in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. See, Jesus is warning us against this tendency in the human heart to trumpet itself. We want to be seen and admired. We have a need to be noticed. It's how we've learned to seek love. And he gives 3 examples of this kind of behavior, 2 of which we read, and a third which comes a little later in Matthew chapter 6. The first is giving to the poor. And Jesus says, when it comes to giving to the poor, do not sound, verse 2, a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be praised by others. The second example that Jesus gives is on prayer. And when he comes to prayer, Jesus says, verse 5, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners. And then the third example that Jesus gives is fasting. And he says about fasting, verse 16, and whenever you fast, do not look dismal like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces so as to show others that they are fasting. He's reflecting on that subtle ability that we have to posture ourselves ever so slightly in a way which will make others ask us the question, are you okay? To which we can respond, oh, it's fine, I'm just fasting. Whenever you see life flourishing, it is because it is receiving nourishment from outside itself. Are you searching for nourishment from the praise and approval of other people? Jesus says that those who seek to secure themselves in the praise of people, trumpeting their righteousness for affirmation and approval, they have received their reward in full. And the truth is that our culture does not care about the kind of person you are in private. It only cares about how you show up in the public place. We project balanced and successful lives, but underneath the surface there is deep frailty. We're less secure in ourselves. We're often more anxious and more depressed. But Jesus offers an alternative to an identity based on performing for others. And so point 2, the secret place. In each of his 3 examples, giving to the poor, prayer, and fasting, Jesus presents an alternative way of practicing your righteousness. And the key about each of these is that it is, as he says, in secret. About prayer, Jesus says, verse 6, whenever you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. That room in Greek is a word that refers to an inner room, a storeroom. Sometimes it's called a closet. Go to the space where there's no windows or natural light coming in so that you will not be seen by other people. Do it in secret. And it's the same with fasting. Jesus says of fasting, when you want to fast, wash your face and anoint your head with oil. Those were the things that you would do before and after you had eaten. And so the idea was to just do the practices that would make the other people that you were interacting with thinking they've just had a good meal, they're doing fine. Because the point is not to try and attract the attention for the practice to receive the reward of the praise, but to do it in secret for your Father who is in heaven. Now, Jesus isn't talking about a transactional relationship with God. It's not like, do this, you'll get more. The more you do it, the more you'll get. I think he's just talking about relationship dynamics. You've got 2 audiences that you can live for. One is the audience of other people. The other one is God. And you will either need to choose to prioritize God's view of you or other people's view. You cannot have both in first position in your life. Jesus knows that we all long for the attention of someone. We all want to be seen. He actually doesn't think that it's a bad thing to want to be noticed. He just knows that our healthy desire to be seen has become disordered, and what we need is the attention of a Father in heaven. To be known by him, to be seen by him, to have intimacy with him that comforts us in our weaknesses, corrects us in our arrogance, and makes us feel safe and secure. And Jesus tells you that if you want this, you've got to get to the secret place. The place where it's just you and him. And this is true of how we practice our virtues, but it's also true of so much else. God is in secret, and there is spiritual power and potency in meeting him there. I say this a lot, but I just think it's remarkable that Jesus, the incarnate Son of God, would often, the gospel writers tell us, retreat to lonely places to pray. And when he does this, he will often go not just for like 20 minutes, but for hours and nights on end. What does Jesus know that drives him at the very moment, we're told often in the Gospels, when the crowds are just starting to build and he's getting momentum? What is it that he knows, which means that he says, I don't want to be here. I need to be with my Father on my own. He knows that his power comes from that place. And he knows that the way that you stay humble is by engaging with God first, so that from that place you can do your ministry to other people. John chapter 2, there's this lovely moment where Jesus has turned water into wine at the wedding in Cana. He's gone to the temple, he's turned over money tables, and he's just starting to get a following. It says that people are seeing the signs that he'd been doing. And then it says, but Jesus would not entrust himself to any of them, for he knew what was in the heart of man. He knew what they wanted to do with him, to make him a king, a political king by force. He was living before his Father in heaven. Jesus knew that humility is formed in the private places and expressed in the public places, or we could put it this way: pride enjoys a platform. Humility loves hiddenness. Pride enjoys a platform. Humility loves hiddenness. And I find this confronting personally and challenging because so much of the role of being a pastor is ministry in public. And it can be so easy to start out serving God but slip into serving your own image. And I've been reflecting on this again recently and on how my responsibility as pastor has grown in this new season. And I've been feeling from God that as my responsibility increases, I've got to get a deeper cup, a deeper well with God in secret. I might have told some of you this before, but at seminary I was given a visualization technique or a exercise that I've continued to use when I receive positive affirmation about my ministry, including about sermons that I've preached. What I do internally, you wouldn't be able to see it, but what I do internally is I visualize the person handing me a bunch of flowers, and then my job is to hand those flowers to Jesus. So that I'm not the destination of it, I'm just a kind of conduit for where the glory and the praise truly belongs. And it's just one of the small things that I have to keep practicing because I want to try and work out what does it look like to be first and foremost before God before I'm in front of other people. What I need to hear and what we all need to hear is the voice of God speaking louder than the other voices around us. I think of the example of Elijah in 1 Kings 19. I don't know if you know this story. It's just after the moment where Elijah has challenged the prophets of Baal at Mount Carmel, 1 Kings 18. God sends the fire from heaven, consumes the sacrifice. The prophets of Baal are chanting and dancing and cutting themselves, and nothing's happening with their sacrifice. At the end of this demonstration, Elijah orders that all the prophets of Baal, hundreds of them, be collected up and killed because of the way that they have been dishonoring the Lord. And Queen Jezebel, who loves Baal and has been a great enemy of God, she hears that her prophets have been embarrassed and that Elijah has killed them. And so she sends a messenger to Elijah saying, "Watch out, what you have done to those prophets, I will do to you by the end of tomorrow." And here's Elijah, and he's scared, and he's on his own, and he flees. And so he runs off into the wilderness. He sits beneath a solitary broom tree. He complains to the Lord. He goes to sleep. The Lord wakes him up, says, "Eat some food." I was talking to Alison Moffat about this earlier and this week, and she said, he just needs a snack and a nap, which is sometimes true of us. But then he goes back to sleep again. The Lord wakes him, gives him some more food. He then goes on a 40-day journey to Mount Horeb, and he comes to Mount Horeb and he complains to the Lord. He says, "I am the only prophet who is left, and I've been speaking your word and trying to be faithful to you, and look where it has got me." And so God says to him, "Okay, I'm going to pass before you." That's the words. And if you know pass before you, that is going to draw up for you what God does before Moses at Mount Sinai. This is going to be a glory moment. So Elijah goes onto the mountain, and it says there, and I'll just read it for you from 1 Kings chapter 19. "Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And there came a voice to him that said, 'What are you doing here, Elijah?'" Now, I just find this such a beautiful little moment of encounter because God's voice and presence were in that still, small whisper. Elijah didn't need the spiritual mountaintop experiences of a hurricane, earthquake, or fire. He needed to be quiet long enough that the voice of God could speak louder than the voice of Jezebel's threats. And to us, God says, I need you to be quiet and I need you to get to that secret place so that I can speak louder to your heart than the world around you. Let me speak louder to you than your parents. Let me speak louder to you than social media. Let me speak louder to you than your boss. Let me speak louder to you than your spouse. Let me speak louder to you than the promises of this world. Let me speak louder to you than your heart which condemns you. Would you let God meet you in that place, that hidden space, that secret place where you're just before Him and not performing for others? And to do that, you will need to make room. Maybe that's room in your schedule, carving out time for God's word and prayer. Maybe you had a habit of that at one point in your life, but you've fallen off with it and you need to get it back. Maybe that's room to engage with your emotions. You read the Bible and you pray, but you never kind of engaging your emotions with God. You're not even sure what emotions are or how you would access them. And maybe you need to start journaling or writing poetry or reading poetry or something that might just crack you open a little bit. Maybe that's, for you, it's praying a regular prayer of examine each night as you get ready for bed, that ancient Christian practice at the end of each day of tracing what has happened throughout the day and figuring out what have been the moments of consolation where I felt lightness and joy and goodness, and what have been the moments of desolation where I felt spiritually afflicted, tempted, and emptied. And then using that to bring it to the Lord. Or maybe that's making room by confessing sin, repenting of a need to be noticed by others, rather than longing for the attention of your Father in heaven. And if you do this, you will find that God can take what He is forming in you in secret and use it powerfully in public for His glory, which brings us just briefly to our third and last point, clay jars. See, that other reading that we had this morning from 2 Corinthians 4 picks up on this concept of vulnerability. Paul starts by saying there in chapter 4, verse 5, for we do not proclaim ourselves, notice that, we're not proclaiming ourselves. We proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord and ourselves as your slaves for Jesus' sake. And what strikes me about what Paul does here is how much he can rejoice even as he's been humbled by his circumstances. He talks about being afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed. Here is someone who is not stabilizing his sense of self by the affirmation and approval of people. And what that allows him to do is to own the fact that he, together with his companion Timothy, are clay jars. Verse 7, but we have this treasure in clay jars so that it may be made clear that this extraordinary power belongs to God and does not come from us. Paul's able to embrace weakness. He's able to embrace vulnerability and honesty and authenticity. He doesn't have to hide it, but he can be open about it. Why? Because he knows who he is in Christ. His identity is secure. He's been formed in that hidden place, and he knows that in the case of the gospel, the weakness of the vessel magnifies the treasure that it is holding. What's that treasure? Verse 6, for it is God who said, let light shine out of darkness. He is the one who has shone in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. See, one of the paradoxical things here is that I think liminal spaces bring us into an opportunity to be vulnerable with each other, to share the things that we're struggling with, to talk about the moments of feeling lonely or frustrated, the suffering that we might have in our lives. But the way to be able to talk about it with other people, the way to be able to be open about it in a way which is not performative, but actually seeking to honor God, is to have done that work of being with God first. And when you live for God, then you can be a blessing to other people. It can free you and form you and produce in you the maturity that can steward his blessings and to be a container, a clay jar for his glory. And this kind of humility that you need to be able to address God first and then to be honest about that with other people, vulnerable with other people, that only comes when you know that God is at work in your life, that He has shone the glory of His Son into your heart, that your heart is secure in Him, and therefore that you can be a clay jar, ordinary and weak. Because it turns out that is the kind of vessel that most displays the glory of Jesus. I'm going to invite the musos to come up, and in a minute we're going to sing a song that kind of reflects on some of the themes that we've been talking today. It's the song Who You Say I Am. But before we come to sing it, and just to ready ourselves for that moment of response, I want to give you just a couple of minutes to sit in silence and prayer, just to think about what it is that God's pressing on your heart today, and where maybe you have a need to grow that work with God in secret, maybe a need to put aside that desire to live for other people, maybe just an opportunity to be a little bit more open and vulnerable about how you're going and what God is doing in you and through you. And even if you don't understand it, to be able to say to some people, even just a few trusted people, would you be with me and pray with me as I walk through this? But I'll give you a couple minutes just to think about that, and then our musicians will lead us into song.